Hello, I have a story to tell you, so grab a cup of coffee or some tea and let me dive right in. Whether this is your first deliverance story, which would be thrilled if I'm the one who gets to introduce you to that, or it's your 57th, I have a story that is pretty typical among deliverances, I think, but for me, it was absolutely mind blowing. So, uh, when I was younger, I had a few spiritual encounters that I would say were supernatural. When I was 5, I had just been spanked and was in my room on the bed that I shared with my sister. And I was crying and I felt very alone and isolated with no one to comfort me. And I felt someone hug me from behind. And when I turned to look, there was no one there. And years later, I thought maybe it was an angel. That's what I told myself for a long time. I didn't really know what it was. I heard recently that when we don't really understand something, we kind of dismiss it and just ignore it because we can't explain it. So there's no point in spending time trying to understand it, right? So I just kind of put it out of my mind. And several years later, I was with a family friend and I was walking up to, so we had just had a big party in the woods where we used to have parties, and it was getting dark, but it wasn't quite nighttime. And as I approached the clearing where we would have the gatherings, I could see someone crouching behind a chair, and I thought that it was the someone that I knew. It was the shape of someone that I knew. But as I got closer, it disappeared. And the family friend was up there, and I was like, "Did you see that? Like, there was someone behind the chair." And he was like, "Oh, I've been watching them for a while. It's a demon." And this seemed quite normal for this person, so I don't know what all they saw. But for me, this was not typical. I knew about demons, um, but I didn't see them. So then I got scared and I suggested praying around, like making a loop around the campsite where we were at and the clearing. And we walked in opposite directions, and as I was approaching him, as we like completed this circle, I saw his older brother behind him, but as he got closer it disappeared. And I was freaking out because I was not used to these kinds of demonic encounters. But I mean, again, it seemed quite normal for this individual. So later I realized like what in the world must have been happening to him. But those are a few of the supernatural encounters that I've had. We had experienced some healing in our family and provision that was always attributed to supernatural sources. So I knew God can do miracles still, but I just didn't. It was more of a you don't really know when he's going to show up kind of deal. So I'll fast forward to a couple of years ago when I found out that through watching the documentary on Amazon Prime called Shiny Happy People that I had been raised in a cult. And that really shook a lot of things in my world at the time. I realized that I had been raised in a lot of legalism and rules and regulations that were not in the Bible, and that these had actually trapped me. And the cult was IBLP, and when you have so many rules imposed on you and you want to be a good person or a good Christian, you want to please the authorities in your life, it causes a vigilance in your mind that is very, very difficult to cast off. I was very rigid growing up. I was constantly policing my thoughts, policing my body. I wanted to make sure that I didn't act in a way that was immodest or inappropriate, because that would invite and incite lust in the men around me, including my dad and brothers, I was told, and I would be responsible for that. So that was one way that it made me hypervigilant. Other ways were that you could, have a wrong thought and now you've sinned. And we were given a big emphasis on, we were made to believe that God was a big judge in the sky. The Bible verses that IBLP uses a lot come from the Old Testament, where you see a God that is very just and requires perfection, following the law. And there wasn't very big emphasis on the New Testament, except for Matthew 5, chapters 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount. For some reason, that was a big thing that was emphasized. But again, it was distorted and manipulated to say something that it doesn't say a lot of times. So just the cult really bred in me hypervigilance. For one, hypervigilance over the danger to myself, especially sexually, that at any moment I could cause a man to stumble, and if they did something to me sexually, that would be my fault if they sexually abused me. And there was no recourse for that. You can't tell anyone. And there was a lot of sexual abuse that happened in my home growing up in various ways, and it was never properly dealt with. And that leaves a big scar, that leaves a big gaping wound that, unless it's tended to, is going to continue being a wound and affecting you. But up until that point, I didn't know that it affected me. There are a lot of ways that the cult really messed with my mind and grew in me ways of thinking that were deeply unhealthy. But I will have to go into those in a later video. I really want to focus on the testimony that what the Lord brought me out of. So after watching that documentary and realizing that a lot of what I had been taught was a lie, I did start to try to discover what was the truth. And I still believed in God, and I really did want to follow him. I had a heart for him, and I started spending more time in prayer and reading books about godly Christians throughout history, trying to study the Bible. I started studying a little bit of Hebrew, learning all kinds of fascinating things that I never knew were there, and feeling like very misled, that I'd been giving a very surface view of the Bible. I was raised in a KJV only, and the KJV language is so obsolete. I had a really hard time assigning the correct meaning to it, because if you use utterance today, it's almost a joke. People don't usually say that today. So anyway, that started that journey. But we also became friends with some people who believed that you needed to follow some of the Mosaic law. And during that time, it kind of awoke in me that legalism again, that, oh no, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I'm not following God the way that he wants me to. And I became very fearful of that and trying to figure out, okay, what are we supposed to follow? I was very confused, and they never gave me a straight answer about which specifically I should be following. It was very convoluted to me, very confusing. I didn't understand it. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like going back into bondage again. So I finally started giving up. I had been a good little girl my whole life. I was very, on the outside, I was kind and compassionate. I had a lot of empathy, and when I was out in public, I could look extremely godly if I wanted to. I knew all the right things to say. I'd memorized over 2,000 verses, and I knew the right things to say. I knew the language. I really thought I was a Christian. I really had a heart I really wanted that, but I kept feeling like I was left out of the loop. And my sister Haley, she had shared her testimony after she'd gotten baptized with all of us in the family. And as she was explaining like how she felt and how she had felt all this darkness coming out of me, and she was crying and just being very authentic and genuine. And I thought, why don't I have that? Why can't I get that? And I even got down on my knees that night and was crying and like, God, I really want that. And she had told me that she had been healed from her diastasis recti, that where her abs had split apart during her pregnancy, and that had happened during my second pregnancy. And I really wanted it to go back together without all the pain of the exercise and possibly pelvic floor therapy and all these things I would have to go through. And I remember begging my husband to pray for it, but and I prayed for it, but I didn't understand any of what was happening, so of course nothing happened. But then a couple of months after I started searching, I had kind of given up again. It was like a burst of a spiritual high, if you will, that I could only maintain for so long, and I had finally just given up, like in my mind quietly, just like, God, you're too hard to follow. I really don't. I'll go to church, I'll teach my kids all the songs, I'll do all the motions, but I don't feel you. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, and you're just too hard to please. I give up. So a couple months later, Haley contacted me, and at the time, Haley was estranged from the family. She still is for most of them, but for me, I actually had deep hatred and resentment in my heart towards her, and I didn't even know why. That's a whole other video, but at the time that she contacted me, I believe she was in a cult. I'd been hearing things about various miracles that she was experiencing, and I didn't believe any of it, and I actually thought that, maybe she'd gone to the dark side. And I really didn't want anything to do with her new religion. And so I told her that very quickly after she suggested that we start talking. And she was like, oh, that's fine. And she was never pushy about it. And so we just started up weekly conversations, and she helped me start to unravel all of the crap from my childhood that I had been steeped in, and just gave me these mind-blowing revelations every week. And our family started to fall apart. Our family of origin started to fall apart, and secrets started being exposed, and just horrible things were coming to light, and it just felt like too much. My world felt like it was crashing down, like crippling anxiety. My the muscle pain that I dealt with for over a decade was getting out of control. I was experiencing stressful headaches and fatigue and brain fog and all the trauma symptoms that mimic ADHD-like symptoms, the confusion, the time blindness, I could go on and on, the hyperactivity and the boredom, the listlessness, the depression, all of it. So I started to go see a therapist, and she was amazing and so kind, and she started to help me see how things really were. And I also started seeing a massage therapist for the pain that I dealt with, and it felt like both of them were trying to thaw ice. Like I had been frozen mentally and physically for so many years. Like I was so hypervigilant mentally that my body was rigid constantly, and so my muscles had locked up. And I actually didn't know that this was a muscle right here, the trapezius. I thought it was a bone because it was so tight, and I also didn't know that much anatomy at the time. So, whole other story. Anyway, I'm gonna try to get to the good part because I don't have much time. Well, we'll fast forward a good bit. I went to about 8 months of consistent therapy, and I got to the point where I was giving myself a lot more grace. I could finally see that I was someone of worth, of value. I knew my family was deeply unhealthy, and was starting to see that I could take care of myself, that I was a person worthy of love and taken care of, and I was starting to be kinder to my children, but I was still dealing with the pain. The fatigue was worse, the confusion, the anxiety, the crippling anxiety, the headaches. I would get dry eyes in public, and then I would start getting really tired, and then I would come home and sleep for 2 to 3 hours and feel more tired when I woke up. So rest was stolen from me. I never really felt completely rested. It was an awful way to live. So then we got back to the States. We were in Germany at the time, during all that was happening. We lived there for 3.5 years, and we had just moved in at the end of June to the States. And I was still in contact with Haley and still talking to her consistently. And I had bought her a bunch of Christmas presents, but I kept forgetting to send them. And now that we were stateside, I really wanted to send them, and I kept forgetting. So my husband found out that there were some really cheap airline tickets, and as a surprise, he bought some for me to send me down to Florida. And so I took all the gifts down with me, and I was actually not excited to go. When he told me, I was so confused by my emotional reaction inside. I acted like I was really excited, but I actually wasn't. I felt actually very apprehensive and like, oh, I don't want to go down there. Why do I not want to go down there? Like, I love to travel. This is a fun trip. I get to go by myself. Like, what is happening right now? So we went, and everything went smoothly, but on the plane, and I have taken many, many plane rides, and I've even, traveled across the ocean several times. But this plane ride, I was just terrified. And as we were about to land, I was convinced we were going to crash and die. And I had the urge to grab the person's hand next to me. I didn't, but my legs were shaking. I felt out of control. Fear. So we landed safely, and I finally made it to their house, and we spent a wonderful weekend together. We didn't talk very much about their new beliefs, except they did tell me, some of the experiences that they'd had. They also, made sure I knew they were not in a cult. And I said, well, I've watched several cult documentaries, not just of the cult that I was in, but also like Mormon cults and Jim Jones and that kind of thing, 'cause it fascinates me. And the characteristics of the leaders are very similar. And the person that they were listening to, his teachings, Torben Sundergaard, he doesn't have any of the characteristics of these cult leaders. So, yeah, I quickly understood that they're not planning to, sell their home and give all the money to him. They're not moving into a compound. They weren't even in contact with any other people that were consistently meeting for this. Like, they weren't meeting anybody about this. But the second night that we were there, we were staying up late, Haley, Reagan, her husband, and I, and we were talking, and they were sharing with me some, the first night they had shared some experiences that they'd had with demons and their son. Their son had actually had a demon, and would have moments where he would try to attack them, and he would just get this rage that would come over him, and this normally very sweet, kind boy would just go insane. And there was even a point where Haley slept in the room that he was in because he kept telling them that there was something there. And she woke up and something physical was trying to choke her in her sleep. I say physical. I mean, she felt it physically. She didn't see it. So, and then someone had come to stay with them. And they were staying on the other side of the wall that Asher, their son, sleeps on. And Asher could hear chanting through the walls. And he came and told Haley, like, Mom, they're in the walls. She's like, who are in the walls? And she's like, and they're chanting, and they're saying, cha, 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 cha. And she was like, oh. And she quickly realized what they were, and she was like, well, we don't have to be afraid of them. And he was like, oh, yeah, because they'd already dealt with his demons at the time, so he was completely delivered. So that night, I could not sleep. And I thought this was the night that I arrived, and I thought it was because I had so much adrenaline on the plane. And I kept thinking, what if I brought a demon? And I was like, you're crazy, Mackenzie. We don't have demons. Like, you're a Christian. I was like, God, like, this isn't possible, right? Like, like, I don't have a demon, like, this is insane, like, it's just late and I'm just keyed up. And I kept thinking, they're gonna figure out that I have a demon and they're gonna come in here and, like, I don't know what's gonna happen. But then I went to sleep finally, and when I went to sleep, I had a dream that I was in their bathroom and that they were casting demons out of me. And when I woke up, I was like, wow, what a wild dream. And I told it to Haley and Reagan. We kind of laughed about it. Well, that night, I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia back in May, I believe it was, right before we left. And it's kind of a hopeless disease. They tell you, we don't know where it comes from, we don't know why it happens, and there's no cure for it. There is a huge amount of evidence that it's, many women get it linked to trauma. After a traumatic event, then it'll be triggered, like they were already predisposed to it, but like many genes, you have to turn them on or off depending on environmental factors. And I had many traumas, especially when I was 15. That's when it really started to manifest, and that's when I had some things happen to me. So I was getting to the point where I was getting really frustrated with it, realizing maybe this will never go away. So I thought, out of almost desperation, but almost out of curiosity, I was like, could you guys pray for me to be healed? And I started crying, and I was like, this is really weird. Why would this feel so vulnerable? It was almost like admitting that they could help me. And I knew there was something different about them. Haley was completely different. She had this humility and love and compassion about her that I had never experienced from her before. Their home just radiated peace. And their children are so loving, and Reagan was so kind. Like, their home is just filled with love. And it wasn't the kind of love that you can manufacture or pretend or put on a show. It's something that it's just tangible. It's in the air. You can just feel it when you walk in. So they, of course, were delighted to pray for me. It was pretty late by this point, but and we were getting ready to go to bed when I asked, and I kind of asked, offhandedly. So they sat down on either side of me and put their hands on my shoulders, and as they started to pray, I closed my eyes because I felt like, that was what I wanted to do. And my heart started speeding up really fast in an unnatural way, pounding in my chest. And I thought, I must be doing that, even though it was really impossible, and I wasn't even expecting that to happen. And then I saw some water, and I was in the water, and I was like, okay, this is weird. And I think I thought my jaw was healed, so I was like, I was like, okay, I think it's good, I think it's fine. I stood up, and they were like, well, do you understand baptism? And I was like, I think I actually asked them, like, guys, I think I want to be baptized, because I didn't understand it the first time. I was 12, and it was really all about me. It was just a big party to celebrate me, and it wasn't a public confession of my faith, like they were saying. It was just me going through the motions of what you were supposed to go through if you were, a good Christian girl. So I didn't quite understand it then either, that it's not just symbolic, that something spiritual happens when you get baptized, that your old man dies, that you are identifying in Christ's death, and you're dying, and your new man dies, or your old man dies, and you are raised in the new life with Christ when you come up out of the water. So they baptized me one time, and also I was actually hyperventilating about getting baptized. I was like, guys, I don't know about this. Like, what if I'm a completely different person? And they're like, no, you'll be the same person. You'll be the best version of you. You'll be, a better version of you than, you'll be free to be you. And so I was really scared about it, for no good reason, except that the demons knew what was going to happen, or what could happen. And so they baptized me, and I came up out of the water. I'm like, and nothing happened. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, did I do something wrong? And they're like, no, you're not supposed to, like, conjure up anything. Like, whatever happens, happens. And you can't manufacture a feeling. Everybody's different. Everybody's experience is different. And I was like, well, maybe I just wasn't ready. So they baptized me again, which I realized is not biblical because of that verse. There's one faith, one baptism. I understand it. But I sat there and they were like, look, you can't do anything. You have to let God do it. And my whole life I'd been striving. And they're like, you have to let go of that. And I was like, I really don't know how. I don't know how to let go of it. So I was like, well, I don't know if I'm fully healed or not. Because with fibromyalgia, you get, anyone with fibro will tell you, like, you have times when you're better and times when it's really bad. And at the time, it wasn't super bad, and I could, placebo effect. That's what I kept telling them. I think this is placebo effect. And Reagan finally told me, if you keep thinking this is placebo, you'll never actually believe it ever happens. You won't be open to it actually happening. So I thought, you know what? Pray for me one more time and then we'll all go to bed. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to relax into this. And whatever happens, happens. I know I won't be conjuring it up because I don't even know what to expect. So I close my eyes and they start praying for me. And almost immediately, I can't feel my legs anymore. And they just give out underneath me. And I fall to the ground. And what happened next is was unbelievable to me. I started seeing dragons in my mind, very vivid dragons I'd never seen before, and they were looking me in the face, and as I would concentrate on one, my body would convulse in a different way, and they would come out, and they were demons. And Jesus took me on this journey in my mind, this vision it was like an epic journey, and I'll have to go in more detail about what all I saw there in a future video. But he showed me that when I was 5, it was actually him hugging me, and that he had been crying with me, and he was asking God if they could take me right then, and God said no. So he had to leave when I turned to look. And I asked him later, why didn't you stop all the bad things that were happening? Why didn't you protect me? He said, I did protect you. I allowed you to disassociate at the time so that I could get you to this place to heal you. God doesn't always stop the bad things happening to us. And I think sometimes that's because as believers we have more authority than we've often been told from the church. And as through the authority of Jesus on earth, we are the ones who are supposed to be stopping the bad things from happening. We are the ones who are supposed to stop human trafficking and stop abortion and stop all these things from happening, and to comfort and help heal through the power of the Holy Spirit those that have been hurt. We are the hands and feet of Jesus now. And why is there evil in the world? Because we're allowing it. Because there's sin, obviously, and people are, allow evil to, they allow themselves to be evil. I'm not saying that people don't have free will, but I think that because we've been made to feel like hopeless about it, that there's not really anything we can do, that we've kind of given up this authority that we have. And anyway, that's a whole separate thing. So yeah, back to the vision. I don't even know half of what Haley and Megan were saying because I couldn't hear them a lot. I was so focused on the vision that was happening. One of the most amazing things that happened during that time was that Jesus showed me a safe world. Every time I thought in my mind, people would say, go to the safe place in your mind, go to the place where you can be alone. And I had never felt that safe in my mind. And part of it was because there was no privacy in our home growing up. Everything was open to everyone else. You couldn't even go to the bathroom in privacy. You had to keep the door unlocked. Well, I think you could go to the bathroom, but if you took a shower, you weren't allowed to lock the door so that people could use the bathroom because there was only one bathroom. So when you're in the shower exposed, people would be going to the bathroom, and sometimes they would dump cold water on you as a joke. So there was no privacy. I didn't have the bedroom that I shared with my sisters. It was a circular floor plan. The entire upstairs was circular, and there were no doors, and you could just walk right up. And so I was never really alone. Even when I would be, in the woods taking a walk, I was always aware that one of my siblings could just walk up, or, I was always afraid that there would be someone else back there, because our property butted up against Hoosier National Forest, and people were, could walk back there if they wanted to. So he showed me this safe world, and it was beautiful. It is beautiful. I go there a lot now. There's a lake and waterfalls and forests and mountains, and just everything that I love about nature is there. And no one else is there on the safe world unless I want them to be. So it's just me and him. And I'll tell you about my prayer cabin later, because I think that's beautiful too. But during this vision, there were moments when Jesus would tell me things, and other times when I would just be focusing on the demons. There was one particular demon, I don't remember what this one was, but I was staring down at his mouth, and he had his mouth open, and he just had teeth all around. He was like what you'd think, like a giant eel with teeth all around, and he wanted to just suck me in, and I just kept looking down at him, and as long as I stayed focused on him, I could feel it manifesting and coming out. But as I was manifesting him and looking down in my mind, physically I was actually bent over, and my mouth was stretched open as wide as it possibly could go, and I could not close it. And I was making these guttural screams, like this sound, almost like the sound that I made when I gave birth to my second son. It was pushing out, like it was crazy. And it was just such a pressure in my jaw as it was coming out. And there was also the spirit of death, or my fear of death. It was like a skeleton, and that one didn't want to come out and kept shaking my head back and forth. And I was not doing it. And I was still conscious, and I could like open my eyes, but my body was moving involuntarily. And if I tried to stop it, it wouldn't, because they were in control. So, I didn't realize how scratchy my voice would get if I talked for so long. All right, trying to get to the best part. So, throughout the vision, I kept seeing this light up in the sky, what I imagined to be God, and I kept trying to get to it. And I would actually physically be flapping my arms like I was trying to fly up to this light. And I was also looking for bodies of water to jump in, because Haley had told me that when people receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit, they often see water or fire. And I kept seeing water, and I kept thinking, if I just get in the water, then I'll baptize myself. I kept trying to do all these things, and I was still striving. I was still trying to do something to get to God. And finally, after the third or fourth time, the thing was, I kept trying to get to the light, and every time I would think I was getting closer, there would be a demon in front, and it would stop me. So finally, Jesus said, "Stop, be still. I am already here." And the light came down, but I felt like I couldn't quite get into it. But I stopped trying, and I sat still, and I gave up, and I was like, well, I guess I can't do anything. And then I was standing under a waterfall, and water is my favorite form, or waterfalls are my favorite form of water. They're so beautiful and clean and lovely, and I was standing under it, and it was pouring around me, and it just felt like God's grace was just pouring down His love. And Jesus was standing in front of me, and it felt very intimate. And I said, "You love me and you know me." And he said, "No, I love you because I know you." And I'd always felt like there was something innately unlovable about me, that I had to surely do something to be worthy of love. And then I drank from the stream, and he held my hand, and I suddenly saw myself as a little girl, and he was walking me out to the safe world, and I sensed that it was like the feeling that I get when I walk with my son Arrow, and I just can't wait to show him all the wonderful things that are in the world. And he was so excited to show me all the things that he had made and all the adventures that we were going to go on in this new life. And I was so excited. And I opened my eyes, and it felt done. And I thought that I would feel a high, like this overwhelming joy, but I didn't. I just felt true peace for the first time in my life. Just this gentle reassurance that I really don't have to do anything to be loved. And since then, there has been many, many visions and so much love and so much learning and growth, and I have a long, 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 long way to go. But I'm excited to share here some of the things that I'm learning, some of the things that I see through visions, and yeah, and if you want to be part of that, come join me. I'd love to tell you about it.